Don't drink that. The whisper barely reached the man holding the crystal wine glass. A cream-colored apron trembled against a silver serving tray. Red wine shimmered beneath the chandelier light. A purple bruise darkened the waitress's wrist where her sleeve had slipped back. The room didn't notice her, but the Mafia boss did. Not because of the warning, because the moment she spoke, the woman across from him smiled. It vanished almost instantly, too fast for anyone else to catch, too fast to explain, yet somehow impossible to forget. Silence fell across the birthday table like a blade laid gently on silk. 70 guests, 3 generations of family, politicians, judges, business owners, men who carried guns under tailored jackets. Nobody moved. Dominic Moretti slowly lowered the wine glass before it touched his lips. He did not look at the waitress. His eyes remained fixed on the woman seated at the head of the table. The woman everyone called the heart of the family. His mother. "Is there a problem?" she asked softly. Her voice carried warmth, concern, the kind of kindness that made people trust her instantly. The waitress swallowed. Her fingers tightened around the tray. The words died in her throat. 3 hours earlier, Ava Brooks had promised herself she would survive this shift without attracting attention. That was always the goal. Blend in. Serve food. Collect tips. Leave. At 32 years old and nearly 300 pounds, she had spent most of her life learning how to disappear before other people could make her feel visible. Some people remembered her because of her size. Others remembered her because of something worse. 3 years ago, she had accused a chef of drugging a customer. Security footage disappeared. The customer changed his story. The restaurant fired her. The internet called her unstable. Since then, employers spoke carefully when they rejected her applications. In her swollen feet, covered the fading bruise on her wrist with makeup, and reminded herself to keep her head down. Then she saw something she could not ignore. It happened during the singing, while everyone watched Dominic cut the birthday cake, while phones recorded and grandchildren laughed. Ava was carrying champagne from the kitchen when she noticed Mrs. Moretti reach across the table. Not toward her son, toward his wine glass. Just a small adjustment, barely noticeable, the elegant movement of a woman fixing a detail. Except she wasn't looking at the glass. She was looking around the room first, checking who was watching. Ava had spent years serving wealthy people. Rich people ignored staff. They forgot waitresses existed. That made them careless. She watched Mrs. Moretti remove a folded cream napkin from her lap. She watched her gently wipe the rim of Dominic's crystal glass, then return the napkin beneath the table. Nothing dramatic, nothing criminal, yet something inside Ava tightened, because a second later Mrs. Moretti smiled. Not at her son, not at the guests, at the glass itself. And now, standing frozen beneath the chandelier while 70 people stared at her, Ava realized something else. The faint coral lipstick stain resting on the rim of Dominic's wine glass did not match the deep burgundy lipstick Mrs. Moretti was wearing tonight. Dominic Moretti's gaze stayed on the wine glass for another second before he finally looked up. Not at Ava, at his mother. The room seemed to exhale all at once. A senator reached for his water. Someone laughed too loudly near the end of the table. Crystal chimed softly as guests shifted in their seats. The spell should have broken. Instead, it deepened. Mrs. Moretti touched the pearls at her throat and smiled with the calm confidence of a woman who had spent 40 years teaching powerful men how to trust her. "I think our waitress may be tired," she said gently. "It's been a long evening." The words sounded kind. They landed like a sentence. A few guests nodded. One woman offered Ava a sympathetic look usually reserved for people having public breakdowns. Ava felt heat rise into her face. She hated that look. More than anger. More than insults. Pity meant nobody intended to listen. "What exactly did you see?" Dominic asked. His voice never rose. He didn't even stand. Yet every conversation stopped again. Ava swallowed. "I saw her wipe the rim of the glass." "With a napkin?" Mrs. Moretti asked softly. "Goodness. I was removing a fingerprint." A ripple of relieved laughter moved through the room. Ava heard it. Every person silently choosing the easier explanation. The familiar one. The safe one. She almost let it go. Almost. Then she remembered another dining room 3 years ago. Another customer. Another smile. Another room full of people who decided she was imagining things. The lipstick is wrong, she said. Silence returned. Smaller this time. Sharper. Mrs. Moretti blinked once.
I'm sorry.
Ava pointed toward the glass. Her hand trembled, but she did not lower it. The stain on the rim isn't the same color you're wearing. Several heads turned toward the glass. Then toward Mrs. Moretti. Burgundy lipstick. Coral stain. Tiny difference. Easy to dismiss. Dominic looked at neither. Instead, he looked at Ava's face. Specifically at the moment after she spoke. People lying usually searched for approval. Ava searched for confirmation, as if she wanted someone else to notice what she noticed. That bothered him, more than the accusation itself. Enough! The banquet manager snapped. He appeared beside Ava with forced professionalism stretched tightly across his face. I'll handle this. Handle. Another polite word. Ava knew what it meant. Apologize. Remove her. Replace her before guests complained. The manager lowered his voice. There's still time to leave quietly. She stared at him.
No.
Ava.
No.
Something flickered in his expression. Not annoyance. Fear. Dominic saw it. The manager immediately smiled again, but it was half a second too late. The Mafia boss stored the reaction away without comment. Across the room, the grandfather clock struck 9. Ava felt her phone vibrate inside her apron pocket. One notification, then another. She ignored them. The manager didn't. His eyes dropped briefly toward the pocket before snapping back up. Again, Dominic noticed. Again, he said nothing. Dinner resumed awkwardly. Servers carried plates. Silverware scraped porcelain. The industrial dishwasher hummed somewhere beyond the kitchen doors. For a moment, everything almost felt normal. Heavier than standard banquet linen. Monogrammed with the family crest. Then looked again. The timestamp reads 7:12 p.m. The signature belonged to Mrs. Moretti. Yet beneath it sat a handwritten table number. Table 12. The family table was table 1. Dominic watched her face carefully. You noticed something. Ava nodded slowly. Yes. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. And whoever wrote this changed the number afterward. The ink is different. For the first time all night, Dominic did not look at the paper. He looked at her. Dominic did not look at the wine order slip for several seconds. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows behind him. Somewhere downstairs, a string quartet resumed playing for guests, pretending nothing unusual had happened. Ava stood in front of the desk with her bruised wrist tucked against her stomach. Because she believed him. Because everyone like him knew exactly how to sound reasonable. 3 years ago, another lawyer had said almost the same thing before she lost her job. Dominic remained silent, walking down the hallway. He was deleting something from his phone. And for half a second before the screen went dark, a security camera icon flashed across it. The security camera icon disappeared from Charles Whitmore's phone before either of them could read anything else. The hallway swallowed him. The study remained silent. Dominic sat motionless behind the desk, one hand resting on the wine order slip. Rain traced silver lines down the glass. Ava could almost hear the gears turning behind his eyes. Not belief, not trust, calculation. The kind that happened when a man discovered two facts that refused to fit together. The linen cart, Ava said quietly. Dominic looked up. What? The napkin. She hesitated only long enough to decide she would rather be fired than ignore this. Again. I hid it. 20 minutes later they stood in a service corridor no guest would ever see. Exposed pipes. Utility lights. The distant growl of industrial refrigerators. The luxury of the ballroom felt 1,000 miles away. Ava reached beneath a stack of folded towels and pulled out the cream napkin. For a second she worried it would be gone. Replaced. Destroyed. But it was still there. The coral lipstick mark stared back at her. Dominic accepted the cloth without speaking. The fabric looked small in his hands. Dangerous somehow. He unfolded it slowly beneath the fluorescent light. Then he went still. "What?" Ava asked. He didn't answer immediately. His thumb hovered over the faint brown smear near the center of the fabric. "I've seen this before." The words came out low, almost to himself. Ava waited. Dominic continued staring at the stain. 10 years ago. His eyes never left the cloth. "My father carried medication for a heart condition. One of the compounds left residue exactly this color when it oxidized." The silence that followed stretched tight. Ava felt her pulse in her throat. Not proof. Not even close. But no longer nothing. Footsteps approached. Mrs. Moretti appeared at the far end of the corridor with Charles beside her. She looked concerned. Maternal. The picture of wounded dignity. "Dominic," she said softly. "They're saying you're investigating your own mother." Over a napkin. Charles sighed as if exhausted by the entire situation. This is precisely why misunderstandings become destructive. Mrs. Moretti stepped closer. Her eyes landed briefly on the cloth. "No panique. No fear. Just disappointment. That napkin was mine," she said. "I spilled coffee on it before dinner." A reasonable explanation. Almost elegant. Charles nodded immediately. "There you have it." Ava watched them. Listened. Something bothered her. Not what Mrs. Moretti said. When she said it. "Coffee?" Ava asked. Mrs. Moretti smiled kindly. "Yes, dear." Ava's fingers tightened around her apron. "You never drank coffee tonight." Charles turned toward her. "You couldn't possibly know that." "I served the head table." Her voice stayed calm. Mrs. Moretti only requested chamomile tea. Twice. Nobody spoke. Somewhere down the hall a dishwasher hissed open. Steam rolled through the kitchen doors. Mrs. Moretti's smile remained in place. But her gaze flickered briefly toward Charles. Just once. Dominic saw it. Ava knew he saw it because his eyes shifted there too. Then she reached into her apron pocket and removed a folded receipt she had saved without knowing why. The beverage order from the head table. Time stamped. Signed.
Chamomile tea.
2 servings.
No coffee.
Charles took the receipt. Read it. Smiled. Explained that orders changed all the time. Perfectly reasonable. Perfectly polished. Yet as he handed it back, Dominic noticed something neither of them expected him to notice. Charles never once asked where Ava got the receipt. As if he already knew exactly which order ticket she was holding. Charles Whitmore's expression never changed. That was what made it unsettling. Most people flinched when they were caught. Most people defended themselves too quickly. Charles simply adjusted his cufflink and offered a small, patient smile, as if everyone else had become confused. Then he excused himself and walked away. The corridor felt colder after he left. Dominic remained still for several seconds. The receipt sat in one hand, the cream napkin in the other. Ava watched him carefully, waiting, hoping, fearing. He finally folded the receipt once and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Go home." Her stomach dropped. Of course. This was the part where powerful people took over. Where waitresses returned to their apartments and never learned what happened next. Mr. Moretti. "Go home, Ava." His eyes met hers. Calm. Heavy. "And don't talk about this to anyone." She almost argued. Then she saw something she had not seen before. He was no longer looking at the situation. He was looking through it. Following threads she could not see yet. Outside, rain hammered the city well past midnight. Ava's apartment sat above a laundromat in the Bronx. 2 rooms. Thin walls. A refrigerator that rattled every time the compressor kicked on. She stood barefoot in her kitchen staring at a stack of hospital bills held together by a rubber band. Her mother's name filled every page. Balance due. Past due. Final notice. The numbers felt endless. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "You said no to the statement." Family office itself. Dominic stared at the screen, then opened another file. Security footage requests. Charles Whitmore had accessed ballroom cameras 42 minutes before Ava's warning. 42 minutes before. Dominic leaned back slowly. Someone had started cleaning the story before the story happened. His phone vibrated. A reply from a private laboratory he trusted. Analysis of the brown residue found on the napkin. The report was brief. Not poison. Not exactly. A concentrated cardiac medication designed to interact dangerously with alcohol in certain patients. Dominic read the line twice, then a third time. His father had taken the same medication before he died. The rain tapped softly against the glass. Somewhere in the mansion, a grandfather clock struck 1 in the morning. Dominic opened one final file, a record he had not viewed in years. His father's medical archive. Near the bottom sat a scanned intake form from a hospital visit 11 years earlier. One emergency contact listed. One signature authorizing medication management. His mother's. Dominic's eyes moved from the signature on the hospital file to the signature on the wine order slip lying beside his keyboard. The handwriting matched perfectly. But for the first time in his life, he found himself wondering whether the woman who raised him had been signing far more than paperwork. Dominic slept less than 2 hours. By sunrise, the mansion had returned to its usual rhythm. Staff moved quietly through polished hallways. Coffee brewed in silver urns. Gardeners trimmed hedges visible through enormous windows. Everything looked normal. That was the danger. Lies survived longest when surrounded by routine. Ava arrived at 8 o'clock expecting to be turned away at the gate. Instead, security waved her through without a word. That unsettled her more than rejection would have. A housekeeper led her to a private dining room overlooking the lake. The room felt designed to make ordinary people feel temporary. 12-foot ceilings. Oil paintings older than her entire family line. Chairs that probably cost more than her car. Dominic sat alone at the far end of the table. In front of him rested a sealed manila envelope, an untouched cup of coffee, and a crystal wine glass. The same model used at the birthday dinner. The glass sat empty, waiting. "You're early," he said. "Bus came on time." A faint nod. That was all. Then he slid a folder toward her. Inside were security stills from the ballroom. Hundreds of images extracted from archived footage. Ava flipped through them slowly. Guests laughing. Servers walking. Plates moving. Then something caught her eye. She stopped. Went back. Looked again. "What?" Dominic asked. Ava pointed to a frame captured near the kitchen entrance. "This tray." "What about it?" "That's not the same tray." Dominic leaned forward. Most people would have seen identical silver serving trays. Ava had carried them for years. She knew every dent and scratch. "This one has a bent corner." Her finger moved to another image taken 4 minutes later. "Now it doesn't." Silence settled over the room. Dominic studied the photographs. Different tray. Yes. Same server.
No.
She flipped to another image. Different hands. Dominic's gaze sharpened. Not because she sounded dramatic. Because she sounded certain. A knock interrupted them. Charles Whitmore entered carrying legal documents and his usual smile. Mrs. Moretti followed. Elegant. Composed. Wearing cream instead of burgundy today. Neither appeared surprised to find Ava there. That surprised Ava. "Good morning," Mrs. Moretti said warmly. "I hear we're still solving mysteries." Her tone invited everyone to laugh. Nobody did. Dominic gestured toward the chairs. "Seat." The single word landed heavily. Charles obeyed immediately. Mrs. Moretti sat beside him. Dominic placed the empty wine glass in the center of the table. "Humor me." Charles folded his hands. "Of course." Dominic turned to his mother. "Walk me through dinner." Mrs. Moretti smiled. Again. Again. She described the evening perfectly. The speeches. The cake. The toast. The order never changed. Her voice remained calm. Confident.
Familiar.
Dominic listened without interruption. Then asked one simple question. "Who carried the wine tray?" Mrs. Moretti answered instantly. "The waitress." Ava felt every eye shift toward her. Dominic did not. He kept watching his mother. Which waitress? For the first time, Mrs. Moretti hesitated. Less than a second. Long enough. The same one. Dominic reached into the envelope and removed a printed photograph. A close-up image. A tray. Different hands. Different server. Different uniform sleeve. He placed it on the table without comment. Nobody spoke. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly enough to hear through the walls. Charles cleared his throat. Memory isn't perfect. No, Dominic agreed. It isn't. His eyes moved from Charles to his mother. That's why I prefer records. A phone vibrated on the table. Nobody touched it. The sound seemed to echo. Once, twice, 3 times. Mrs. Moretti glanced toward it before she could stop herself. Ava noticed. So did Dominic. The screen lit briefly with a notification banner. One name. One message fragment. Security archive restore complete. Mrs. Moretti's hand tightened around the armrest. Only slightly, but for the first time since this began, she no longer looked at Ava like a nuisance. She looked at her like a problem. The message remained glowing on the phone screen for only a second before disappearing. Nobody reached for the device. Nobody needed to. The damage had already been done. The private dining room felt smaller now. Airless, like a place built to hold secrets rather than meals. Mrs. Moretti slowly folded her hands in her lap. Charles Whitmore adjusted his tie. Dominic said nothing. That frightened people more than anger ever could. An hour later, every key member of the family sat around the same dining room where Ava had first been dismissed as an overreacting waitress. Board members, advisors, family executives, people whose signatures moved millions of dollars. The crystal wine glass still sat in the center of the table. Empty. Waiting. Dominic had placed it there himself. Nobody touched it. Ava stood near the wall. Not at the table. Not among the powerful people. Exactly where staff were expected to stand. Yet somehow every eye kept finding her. A large monitor illuminated at the far end of the room. Security footage appeared. Restored footage. Original footage. Not the edited.
Archive.
Not the version Charles had reviewed. The real one. The room fell silent. Ava recognized the moment immediately. The birthday dinner. The toast. The cake. The wine service. On screen, a server approached carrying a silver tray, then disappeared through the kitchen doors. For minutes later, a different server emerged carrying a nearly identical tray. Same wine. Different hands. Different route. Different timing. Nobody spoke. Dominic clicked a remote. The footage froze. Play it again. They watched it a second time. Then a third. Mrs. Moretti remained perfectly composed. This proves nothing, she said gently.
No.
Dominic's voice was calm. It doesn't. He pressed another button. A second file appeared. Audio this time. A recovered phone backup extracted from a device belonging to a former estate employee who had died years earlier. The recording crackled softly. Then a familiar voice filled the room. Charles Whitmore. Younger. Nervous. The paperwork has already been changed. Silence. Another voice answered. Mrs. Moretti. Then nobody needs to know. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Ava watched the faces around the table. Some looked confused. Others looked frightened. Dominic looked pale. Not angry. Pale. The recording continued. References to medical files. Medication management. Signatures. Documents altered after submission. The words felt small. Ordinary. Yet each one landed like a hammer. Mrs. Moretti finally stood. That recording is over 10 years old. Her voice remained steady. Without context, it means whatever people want it to mean. Charles immediately nodded. Exactly. Reasonable. Measured. Professional. The same strategy they had used from the beginning. Make uncertainty feel safer than truth. Ava looked toward the monitor. Then toward the cream napkin sealed inside an evidence bag on the table. Then toward the wine order slip. The receipt. The altered shift log. Every small thing. Every detail people had dismissed because someone like her had noticed it. She stepped forward before she could lose her nerve. Then explain the timestamp. The room turned toward her. Ava pointed at the audio file displayed on screen. The recording happened at 7:14 p.m. on the same date listed on the hospital authorization form. Charles opened his mouth. Ava continued. And the modified document was created 23 minutes after the original was signed. Silence. Charles stopped speaking. For the first time since this began, he had no immediate answer. Dominic slowly reached into a folder beside him. His hand lingered there for a moment. Then he removed a single page. An original hospital authorization obtained directly from the archive. Not the edited version. The real one. He stared at it for several seconds. His jaw tightened. Across the signature line sat his mother's name. But the authorization itself did not grant medication management authority. It transferred it to Charles Whitmore. 11 years ago, the same month his father died. Dominic lowered the paper. The room felt frozen around him. He looked at his mother, then at Charles, then at Ava, and for the first time since she had whispered her warning over that crystal glass, he seemed unable to speak. Finally, he placed the original document on the table beside the wine glass and turned toward the family attorney. "Call my attorney." Nobody left the room for a long time after Dominic spoke. The original hospital authorization remained on the table beside the crystal wine glass. The two objects looked strangely connected now. One had almost altered the future. The other had altered the past. Neither needed another word. By the following week, the consequences arrived quietly. Quietly was worse. Family boards met behind closed doors. Financial auditors appeared without warning. Attorneys reviewed records stretching back more than a decade. The charitable foundation Mrs. Moretti had controlled for years announced a leadership transition. Official language, careful language, but everyone understood what it meant. Her authority was gone. Charles Whitmore resigned before the investigation became public. 2 days later, state regulators opened inquiries into altered medical documentation and estate records. He stopped answering calls. Mrs. Moretti did not fight publicly. That surprised many people. She simply withdrew. No speeches. No denials. No dramatic exits. The woman who had spent years standing at the center of every photograph quietly disappeared from them. Dominic never celebrated. That was the strange part. There were no victory dinners. No champagne. No public declarations. The truth had cost him too much. Some evenings he sat alone in his father's study with old files spread across the desk, discovering how many questions he had never asked because trust had seemed easier. Meanwhile, other corrections began. Smaller ones. More important ones. The restaurant group reversed the intoxication report, then erased it completely. Security logs were amended. Internal records corrected. Statements updated. For the first time in 3 years, Ava Brooks's employment file contained the words, "Employee acted appropriately. Employee concerns validated. Employee report confirmed accurate." She stared at the screen for nearly a minute when the Human Resources Director showed her. Not because it changed the past, because somebody had finally written the truth down. Her mother's hospital bills disappeared next. Not paid secretly, not hidden. Dominic assigned attorneys to challenge insurance denials that should never have happened. Claims were reopened, coverage restored, outstanding balances reduced legally and transparently. The system corrected itself because someone powerful finally bothered to look. One afternoon, Ava found herself standing in the same private dining room where she had once been asked to sign a lie. Sunlight poured through the windows. The room felt different now, less like a courtroom, more like a room. Dominic stood near the far wall. Between them sat a shadow box frame. Inside was the cream-colored napkin, carefully preserved behind glass. The coral lipstick mark remained visible. So did the faint brown stain. Below it sat a small engraved plaque. Not evidence, not exhibit, just a sentence. The day someone told the truth and was finally heard. Ava stared at it for a long moment. "You kept it. You did." Dominic replied. You were the one who saved it. Silence settled between them, comfortable this time, not threatening, not heavy. Outside, workers moved through the gardens. Somewhere in the distance, dishes clattered from the kitchen preparing lunch service. Life continuing. You know, Dominic said, when you first spoke that night, I thought you were causing a problem. Ava laughed softly. A lot of people did. He nodded, then looked away toward the lake. Turns out the problem was already here. The words lingered, honest, unadorned. Before leaving, Ava reached into her apron pocket and removed her employee badge. A new one, clean, undamaged. Her correct name centered beneath her photograph.
No warnings.
No notes. No invisible asterisks attached to her history. She said it briefly beside the framed napkin and smiled. The old symbol of humiliation and the new symbol of belonging. Then she clipped the badge back into place and headed downstairs. Later that evening, after her shift ended, she carried a cup of hot coffee to a small table near the kitchen window. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother asking what time she'd be home. Ava smiled and typed back a simple answer. Then she sat quietly for a moment, warming her hands around the cup. No one was staring. No one was correcting her story. No one was asking her to shrink. And for the first time in a very long while, the truth did not belong to the powerful people in the room. It belonged to the woman who had spoken first, and at last someone had listened.